I stood in the pouring rain, staring at a small mahogany casket being lowered into a hole that looked too dark, too deep for a 9-year-old boy. Mud splattered onto the hem of my black dress, soaking through the fabric, chilling me to the bone. The minister cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the empty folding chairs set up in the front row. "Lisa," he whispered, leaning in close. "Should we wait a few more minutes? For your family." I looked at those empty seats, 5 of them reserved for the people who shared my DNA. They were dry, untouched. "No," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the wet air. "Start. They aren't coming." As the first shovel of earth hit the wood with a thud that echoed in my chest, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain, expecting maybe a desperate apology, a car breakdown excuse. Instead, a text from my mother lit up the glass. "Stop being dramatic. The funeral is just a formality. Bring the insurance papers to Sarah's engagement party now. We need to settle this." I stared at the words until they blurred. My son was being buried, and my mother was worried about paperwork for a party. Before I tell you what I did when I walked into that luxury party covered in cemetery mud, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't go home to change. I didn't scrape the cemetery mud off my heels or wipe the rain from my face. I got into my car and drove 20 minutes to the Grand Oak Country Club, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The heater blasted against my frozen skin, but I couldn't feel it. All I could feel was the phone buzzing in my pocket again. Another demand, another ping, another reminder that my grief was on a timer set by my mother. When I handed the valet my keys, he hesitated, looking at the dirt on my hem, then at the pristine white columns of the clubhouse entrance. I walked past him without a word. Inside, the air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted garlic. Laughter drifted from the ballroom, light and airy, the sound of people whose biggest worry was whether the champagne was chilled enough. I caught my reflection in a gilt-framed mirror in the hallway, a dark, jagged tear in a canvas of cream and pastel. My mother intercepted me before I could reach the main hall. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep, her face perfectly made up, not a single tear track in sight. "You look like a disaster," she hissed, pulling me toward a private bridal suite. "We have guests, Lisa. Important guests. Could you not have at least cleaned up?" She shoved me into the room where Sarah was touching up her lipstick in front of a vanity. My sister turned, her eyes scanning me up and down with a look of pure boredom. "Finally," Sarah said, popping her lips. "Did you bring the check? David is waiting to announce the venue expansion, and we need the deposit cleared." I stood there, water dripping from my coat onto the plush carpet. "I just buried my son," I said, my voice quiet, dangerous. "And you want his insurance money for a party extension?" Sarah rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar it made my stomach turn. She reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a piece of stationery, heavy, cream-colored, expensive. She slid it across the vanity table toward me. "It's not just for the party, Lisa. It's compensation. We did the math." I looked down at the paper. It wasn't a condolence note. It was an invoice. Handwritten in her elegant looping script were line items that made my breath hitch. Emotional distress caused by Noah's diagnosis, $50,000. Cancellation fees for Cabo trip due to surgery scare, $20,000. General loss of social standing due to family depression, $10,000. The total at the bottom was circled in red ink. She was charging me for the inconvenience of my son's cancer. "He was a vibe killer for 2 years, Sarah said, examining her nails. "Do you know how hard it is to be happy when you're constantly dragging around a sick kid? We put our lives on hold. We suffered too. That money is basically back pay." For a second the room spun. I flashed back to a night 6 months ago. Noah curling into a ball on his bed, his small body ravaged by chemo, whispering that he was sorry for being sick, sorry for making everyone sad. I remembered holding him until my arms went numb, promising him he wasn't a burden. And while I was holding him, Sarah had been calculating the cost of her missed vacation. The grief that had been drowning me for days suddenly evaporated, replaced by something hot and solid. Rage. It wasn't the screaming kind. It was cold. It was absolute. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized I wasn't looking at family. I was looking at a parasite in silk. I didn't tear up the invoice. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. "You think you're owed this," I said, my voice steady. Sarah smiled, a shark showing its teeth. "I know I am." I folded the invoice along its crease, the paper crisp and sharp against my thumb. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I simply slipped the evidence into my pocket, right next to the phone that was silently recording every word. "No," I said. It was a small word, but it sucked the air out of the room. Sarah's jaw dropped, her perfect composure cracking. "Excuse me." "No," I repeated, turning toward the door. "You aren't getting a dime. Not for the wedding. Not for your emotional distress. Not for the deposit on the new wing." I reached for the door handle, but it didn't turn. A hand had slammed against the wood, holding it shut. I looked up to see my father, Robert, blocking my exit. He wasn't looking at me with the warmth of a parent greeting a grieving child. He He was looking at me like a bank vault that refused to open. My mother, Linda, stood behind him, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. You are being incredibly selfish, Lisa, my father said, his voice low and rumbling. Your sister has a future. He has a life to build. Noah is gone. Hoarding that money won't bring him back. It's immoral to let it sit in an account when your family is suffering. Suffering? I asked, looking around the private suite that likely cost more to rent for an hour than I made in a month. You're drinking Dom Perignon while I have grave dirt under my fingernails. You don't know the meaning of the word. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. We are destitute, Lisa. We spent everything trying to maintain our image during that difficult time. We have debts. If you don't help us, we lose everything. That's a lie, I said flatly. You just bought a boat. My father's face turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen since I was 16. He stepped closer, using his height to intimidate me, a tactic that used to work. It didn't work today. Listen to me, he hissed. You think you have a choice? You don't. We've already spoken to a lawyer. Ever hear of filial responsibility laws? I stared at him. The term sounded vague, archaic. In this state, he continued, a smug smile touching his lips, children are legally required to support indigent parents. If you refuse to share that insurance payout voluntarily, we will sue you for support. We will claim destitution. We will garnish your wages, seize your assets, and drain that trust fund dry in legal fees until you are left with nothing but the clothes on your back. You would sue your own daughter, I whispered, for money meant to honor your dead grandson? We will do what is necessary to survive, my mother said, her voice turning steel hard. The court will see a wealthy young woman abandoning her aging, struggling parents. They won't see a grieving mother. They'll see a piggy bank. My father leaned in, his breath smelling of scotch and mints. You have 24 hours to transfer the funds. Or we file the lawsuit on Monday morning. We will bleed you dry, Lisa. Don't test us. He stepped aside, opening the door with a mock gesture of chivalry. The sounds of the party crashed back in. Laughter, clinking glasses, a jazz band playing something upbeat. I walked out into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a terrifying, icy clarity. They weren't just bad parents. They were predators. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't storm out. I didn't break down sobbing in the hallway. I walked calmly past the ballroom, past the valet who tried to hand me my keys, and into the cool night air. I dialed David's number before I even reached my car. David wasn't a family friend. He wasn't a sympathetic shoulder. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, the kind of lawyer you hire when you want to burn the earth, not bridge gaps. David, I said when he answered on the second ring. I need you to clear your schedule for tomorrow morning. We're going to war. What did they do? His voice was sharp, immediate. They threatened me with a filial responsibility lawsuit. They want the entire trust fund. They called Noah a burden. Be at my office at 8 a.m., he said. Bring everything. The next morning, David's office felt like a fortress. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that kept you alert. The glass walls overlooking the city skyline were spotless. I sat across from him, laying out the timeline, the invoice, the threats. David listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing as I described the filial responsibility threat. It's a desperate move, David said, tapping a silver pen against his desk. But in this state, if they can prove destitution, it's not impossible. It's rare, but it's a real threat. We can't just fight this defensively, Lisa. If we go to court arguing about their finances versus yours, we might get stuck in litigation for years. We need to destroy their credibility before a judge ever sees a filing. I know, I said. That's why I prepared. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, rugged-looking device. It was a trail camera, the kind hunters used to track deer in the woods. Camouflage casing, motion-activated, night vision. David raised an eyebrow. I had a feeling, I explained, my voice steady. 2 days before Noah died, Sarah made a joke about how expensive cemetery plots were. She asked if we couldn't just cremate him and save the real estate. It made my skin crawl. So the day before the funeral, I went to the cemetery early. I installed 3 of these in the trees surrounding the plot. High up. Hidden. David picked up the camera, turning it over in his hands. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. And what did you find? They think I'm just a grieving mother, I said. They think I'm weak. But I knew they wouldn't be able to resist. I knew they'd go there. Lisa, David said, leaning forward. If you have what I think you have, we don't just win a lawsuit. We end them. I have footage, I said. But we need more. We need them to confess. We need them to say the quiet part out loud in public where they can't spin it. David nodded, opening his laptop. Then let's set the stage. You're going to that engagement party next week. The big one. And you're going to bring this. He pointed to the trail camera. We're going to turn their own vanity into their execution. What we planned wasn't just a legal defense. It was psychological warfare. We weren't waiting for subpoenas. We were setting a trap and letting them destroy themselves. When I left his office, I felt something new. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was hunting. A week later, I entered the Ritz-Carlton ballroom transformed, tailored crimson dress, flawless composure. I didn't look broken. I looked dangerous. Sarah saw me and relaxed. She thought I'd come to pay. My parents intercepted me, whispering about family. When Sarah demanded the money, I smiled. Better, I said. I have a toast. I took the podium, unplugged the slideshow, and played the footage. The ballroom froze as Sarah's voice filled the room. Rage, greed, cruelty laid bare. My mother's threats followed. Then I delivered the kill shot. They weren't wealthy developers. They were broke, drowning in debt, trying to steal a dead child's trust fund to pay for the wedding. I walked off the stage as the engagement collapsed behind me. The fallout was instant. William ended it. Creditors swarmed. Then came their last move, a lawsuit demanding support. Cornered animals. So I set the final trap. I met them quietly and told them I'd buried the money, converted it into untraceable diamonds, and placed them in my son's casket. I let them believe I was unstable. I watched greed overpower reason. That night they went to the grave with shovels. The police were waiting. Caught mid-dig, Sarah screamed that the dead didn't need money. She did. That was the truth of her. As they were arrested, she demanded to know where the diamonds were. I leaned in and whispered, there were no diamonds. Just gravel. Their conviction ended everything. The lawsuit, their leverage, their lies. Months later, I stood at the grave in peace. The money became Noah's haven, a refuge for siblings of terminally ill children. I lost the family I was born into,